Hello again, this is Hellcry, and today we're continuing my series on analyzing Y2K, a postmodern RPG. If you haven't seen the first video, there's a link to it in the description and I highly recommend starting there. And once again, I'll explain that I'm covering 1.0, the original release of the game. There are some changes in later versions and it'll be something that I cover in their own video. Chapter 2 begins by getting our next party member, Vella Wild. There's a lot to talk about Vella, but I think it's best to explain her much later. Something that is important that I'll point out now though, is how we've been introduced to Vella so far. We've seen Alex drool over her at the arcade, and then we see a post about her on Onism, exploding things with her mind, before formally meeting her. After meeting her, she introduces us to a few really important concepts that, you guessed it, I'm going to talk about later. So Alex desperately looks for something to take to Vella that'd be interesting and worth investigating. And this is where we get introduced to our next character, Rory Manser.
Hi, I'm Rory. I'm a scene kid with a dead sister.
Rory plays a huge role within the story, even if it's not easily realized by the audience. Our introduction to Rory is that he allegedly sent Alex a PM about a situation in his town. But I want to take a step back and actually look at this before we continue with the story. Rory, or Bare Necessity, as we see on Onism, has quite a few posts. One of them, Ghost Sighting in Windtown, New Jersey, details a few different oddities within Windtown, and within that thread, a user named Superb Pudding responds. Pointing this out now doesn't seem like it's a crucial detail, but I'll explain why we want to note this later. We don't see an email from Rory inside Alex's email, so we have to look at what Alex says the PM says.
Hey man, I saw your post about the elevator girl and the factory she went missing in. My sister vanished a few weeks ago, and there were some screwed up things with her disappearance too. If you're interested in checking out where she was last seen, you should come to Windtown. It's east of the factory the elevator girl was last seen in.
The post that Rory is referring to here is the one that Michael made, where they explored the factory hotel and saw a mysterious entity. Maybe a little late to note this now, but the area that we see in the photos is different from what we experience in the game. Either way, at the end of the thread, Alex posts,
if anyone sees anything that resembles the Star Creature guys or just any weird stuff that happens around your town, PM me or Veriformer and we'd be happy to come check it out. I really want to find Sammy, and I know that there's a connection here.
So why are these posts and the private message important? Well, there's something that Alex says at the end of the chapter, and it's important that we establish a precedent of what Rory said before Alex met him, before Alex even left for Windtown. Covering this user will be a different part of a different video, but there are some details to suggest that Superb Pudding may be Sammy. Neither the post Rory made nor the private message imply that he believes this is connected to Sammy. Upon arriving in Windtown, Rory tells us the story of his sister's disappearance. While it is certainly odd, we're not going to go in detail on that situation. But shortly after, we end up in the sewer, and this is one of the more infamous moments of the game. When we get to the end of the sewer, we have this moment with Vella and Rory, where Vella is sympathizing with Rory's misconception about his sister.
Rory, that isn't your sister. It's...
Shut up! That's Carrie. Can't you feel it? It's so familiar. I can prove it. She understands what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking. I've never been this close to anyone. Trust me, it's her!
Rory. That's not Carrie. Rory. That's you.
So I want to take what's being said here and look at it slightly differently. Rory is looking at an aspect of himself and seeing his sister in it. For all intents and purposes, we could replace the sole survivor here with a mirror. Rory is looking into the mirror and seeing his sister. What would be the meaning of something like this? For me, I would say that this represents a real thing that people do when they're mourning the loss of somebody. They will see the person they miss in everything and construct a version of that person within themselves.
Ugh! This is all my fault. It's all because of me, because of what I'm like. You know?
Somewhere out there in the soul space, this you left his world and stumbled on yours. That's you from another plane. It's likely it was experiencing the same suffering as you.
Outside of Rory, this also represents to Alex what he believed Rory did. Instead of this being a situation where Rory is directing them to something that Alex cares about, like Sammy, he sees it as this self-indulgent, selfish thing Rory's doing.
Vella, can you please explain what's going on here?
At the end of the sewer, instead of it being an answer for anything Alex cares about or could potentially care about, it's just about Rory. There's another thing this represents, where the name Soul Survivor almost acts as a pun. Rory feeling like the sole survivor of the situation with his sister.
This is all fine and shit, but it doesn't bring my sister back. Soul space, minds, realities, all that shit. Who even cares?
Now, this is where the story gets incredibly interesting. What happens next is the most criticized aspect of the original release of the game. Suddenly, the moment is interrupted by an otherworldly alpaca. Now, it won't make sense why this happens unless you consider quite a few things. If you look at this moment, as I mentioned from Alex's perspective, where this wasn't about anything Alex cared about, and he realized it was all about Rory and his trauma, and you follow that up with scenes after leaving the sewer when you have Alex yell at Rory,
Hey, dude, cool it with that! No one cares about your sister right now! We almost just died ourselves!
except the way the game presents it isn't that. They don't just leave the sewer and Alex yells at Rory. A few important scenes happen right in between that, and they sort of contextualize what's going on. So if we look at what happens in the game between these two parts, Alex skipping ahead to a dream sequence and then a week later, where he's moping to himself about the situation he's in.
The following week or so, my mood was strangely languid and serene. Vella's words buzzed in my ears, like a bee hovering around my head. I hadn't spoken with Michael, Vella, or Rory in almost 8 days. Michael was stuck in his house, pretending to study for finals. And taking her cue from the other women in my life, Vella vanished. I had gone to the Frankton arcade hoping to see her each day, but she wasn't around. I hadn't spoken with Rory since that night either. As soon as we got out, Vella went into depth on her soul survivors and metaphysics. Then he ran off saying he needed to clear his head. Sammy, I missed her. I didn't know her really, but I felt like I did.
And then after that, we cut back towards trying to leave the sewer. Between there and the aforementioned scene, we have this really interesting scene with these soul survivors in a white void. This is something I'd rather talk about on its own, but it is a very interesting scene with a lot of symbolism. So, why is all of this important, and what does it mean about the golden alpaca? Well, Alex's principle for why he's upset at Rory is explained in another line.
Yeah, back when you didn't lie to us, you realized you've been leading us on this whole time about your sister? You acted like this was connected to Sammy!
Except what Alex said here isn't true when you look back at what Rory said. He never really claimed that this was connected to Sammy in any way. He kind of clearly stated that this was about his sister and was just asking that, hey, you're interested in this missing person, here is this person that went missing as well. So Alex's anger here is a little unfair, and other scenes around this definitely imply that he feels guilty for what he said here.
Why did you just say that to Rory? You know, you're really gonna regret this once that hot head of yours has cooled it. Bella's not ever gonna go on a date with you, and Michael's gonna find better friends in college.
A lot of this is based on his more selfish desires of friendship. However, I feel this clearly displays the fact that he editorialized the way the events unfolded. What I believed happened with the context of all of this, and of how he never met Sammy that I explained in the last video, is that the golden alpaca could be an event that didn't happen within the reality of the story. That this golden alpaca was a representation of Alex. Sort of like how the entire Soul Survivor represents Rory and him being somewhat selfish in his desires to connect with anyone, including his sister. The golden alpaca represents Alex and how he's forcibly making the narrative about him. And almost sort of an apology, or more aptly, an excuse for why he behaved the way he did. If there was no golden alpaca, their lives weren't really at stake. And if this was the case, it would make what Alex said to Rory in this moment far worse than it was. You can, and people have forgiven Alex for what he said, even standing by him because of the false premise Alex presents. And this is a thing that's going to occur throughout the narrative of Y2K. But before I conclude this video about Rory, I want to talk about where this character goes from here and speak on a couple of scenes that also get criticized. For most of this, we've focused on Chapter 2, but now I'll take the opportunity to jump ahead towards the end of the game. As we continue on with the story of Y2K, we're presented with a few situations where the game directly guides us on a few crucial moments. As I established earlier, Alex has the ability to edit the context of things within the story itself. I feel like these moments are examples of this. But why? In the moments that I've highlighted here, if you choose to not follow what the game is kind of directing you towards, it results in Rory committing suicide.
He's gone. His mother found him. It's too screwed up to even think about. We went to his funeral last night. Where the hell were you? He was hurting from losing his sister still. Oh, shit. I wish there was something more we could have done. If only we'd seen the warning signs. If only we had tried more to reach out to him. If we had just worked a little bit more.
A year ago, I would have thought, don't be so hard on yourself, or if someone wants to die, there isn't anything you can do to stop it. I would have convinced myself it was somehow not my fault. I wouldn't have allowed myself to feel guilty. Why was I so afraid of feeling guilty? Why did I continue to convince myself that nothing was ever my fault? Sometimes things are your fault. I did my best to not let her know I felt guilty. Why? Because I wanted her to like me. I needed everyone to like me. I needed to be a solid guy in everyone's book.
Why this is heavily criticized can seem a bit obvious, but I think it's also missing a lot of context as to why it occurred in the first place. The other scene I want to address before we go forward is in the K&N ending. If Rory commits suicide in the main part of the game, he will appear here. The room that we see him in has a strange line of text associated with it.
You need sugar? What a strange request! Have you checked the supply closet? We should have some in there. Just be careful. Only people with dead friends are allowed to go in.
I feel the important detail here is that you can enter this supply closet regardless. While that can seem inconspicuous, and I'm sure you're already thinking of solutions on the basis of the end of the world stuff. But I want to present a different perspective for you that has far deeper implications.
Hey, I have to tell you something, so just relax. I know it's weird seeing me here, and I get that, but I'm in a better place.
Now, let's pause the dialogue here for a moment. And I want to point out something crucial about not only this ending, but what Rory is saying here. This right here. Not, hey Alex, but hey player name. The name you entered at the beginning of the game.
Don't blame yourself for what happened to me. So just know that I forgive you. Forgive yourself. Just maybe be a little more careful next time a friend is in need.
And I know you're going to say, but I literally made the choices that led to Rory committing suicide. And you would be right, If it weren't for the fact that Alex has control of the narrative and adds the ability to act unlike himself, to reach out to Rory and stop him from committing suicide.
Were my own personal whims so important that I couldn't see he was begging for help?
If you have ever dealt with the loss of someone in a situation like this, there's a prevailing feeling that most people have. I wish I could have done anything to make it to where this person didn't do this. And I believe this is the root of why certain events happen and the presentation of them. Alex is the narrator of the story. He is able to tell you what situations he wants to happen. He is a guiding force within not only the narrative of the game, but also the game itself. Alex has some sort of influence over the presentation of the game itself. So if this is the case, and you feel that to some degree you're responsible for this situation because you said this awful thing to your friend, wouldn't you change the context? Wouldn't you make it to where what you said wouldn't be as bad? Wouldn't you make it so you can talk to them and reach out to them and potentially stop them from doing this? I know I would. I think that's enough for this video. I want to thank Vince94 for voicing Bare Necessity, Robin for voicing SNES Man 99, Lunafreya VA for voicing the KNN receptionist, and again, a huge thanks to Ropesnek for providing the amazing character art you've seen throughout this video. Please support them by following their links in the description, and have a wonderful day.